All right, we are live on Facebook. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Adrienne Billis. I am the Director of Leadership here with the Episcopal Church Foundation, and we have Donald Romanik, our president, who is here to talk with us today about effective vestries in times of crisis. Before I turn it over to him, I just want to review a little bit of tech for all of us. Just to let everyone know here, we are recording this. We are also currently live on Facebook. We will have the recording of the webinar up on our website, ecfvp.org, later this afternoon or early tomorrow, so that you can share it with your vestry members, your parish, your community, everyone you know who might benefit from this but who wasn't able to attend and join us this morning. Also, we will be having a Q&A session after Donald talks with us for a bit. So please feel free to use the Q&A box down at the bottom, a little bit left from center, at the bottom of your screens there. Please feel free to type in. I will be monitoring that throughout. Or you can post your comments on our Facebook page. And again, I will monitor those. And as always, if you have more questions or comments after you've had time to digest and think, please email us and we'd be happy to answer those and take some time to walk you through some certain scenarios that you're dealing with right now. So without further ado, Donald, please take us away.
Thank you, Adrienne. Let's begin with prayer. Most merciful God, we come to you in our weakness and our fear, but we also come to you with trust and hope as we turn to you in our time of need. Bless all those impacted by and responding to the virus, the sick and their caregivers, family members and friends, the medical professionals and the scientists, government officials and first responders, the worried well, and all those who labor to keep us fed and safe. Protect those who are most at risk and bring comfort to the unemployed and those who are economically displaced. Endow us all, but especially those in authority, with wisdom, understanding, patience, compassion, and generosity. Bring us together, unite our communities, remove all fear from our hearts, and fill us with confidence in your healing presence and loving care. We ask you this in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today during most extraordinary times. Before you're all on, we were just saying that each day seems to merge into another as we're all hunkering down in our homes. And it's important to kind of maintain connections, and we're really pleased that we can share some of our thoughts, and more importantly, you share your thoughts with us. Again, these are extraordinary times, and this is when leadership at every level of the church and world is really important. I think a lot of us are going to be judged by how we handle this crisis, much the way we are reflecting on other people handling the crisis at the federal, state, and local level. Vestry service is critical at all times, but especially when we're not gathering as a community of faith. That's on Sundays, when our primary form of interaction is something like Zoom or phone calls, when we cannot share the sacraments in person, when we cannot embrace or share fellowship with food or Eucharist or other types of interactions we're used to. And we feel isolated, we feel afraid, and we're also grieving. I think it's a very important thing for us to recognize that we are grieving. We are grieving the loss of our day-to-day life and the loss of our day-to-day faith communities as we know it. I think we're also grieving, and I'm also grieving as we approach Holy Week, Palm Sunday, when being together and being in the drama and of Passion Tide and Holy Week is really important. And we're not going to be able to do that, sometimes not at all, or at least not in the same way. What I've been suggesting, and I'm going to continue to suggest, is perhaps we establish an Easter day that goes beyond this crisis, and it may be May or June or July, where we get together and sing the hymns and celebrate the resurrection, not necessarily on a calendar basis, but on what's happening in our community and the world. So I have a few thoughts I want to share with you, and as I said, I also want to hear what you're all doing. For those of you who don't know about ECF, we're an independent lay-led organization, and we strive to be a comprehensive and holistic resource that vitalizes Episcopal faith communities. And one of our roles we're doing during this pandemic and this period of sheltering at home is making sure that we share information and have opportunities to gather. We have webinars, we have a resource hub on ecfbp.org. And we're here to respond to your questions and thoughts and comments. And we want to walk alongside you during this crisis and also when we get to the other end. First of all, I think a little bit going back to basics on what we feel is the role of the vestry, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that role changes in times of crisis. First of all, my definition of vestry is that group of elected people who, in partnership with the rector or priest in charge, is responsible for the missional, spiritual, strategic, and fiduciary aspects of the congregation. And you're going to hear a lot about partnership. Clearly, the rectors and the priests have certain roles and responsibilities. But I really feel at even normal times, but especially during these times of crisis, we're in this together. And I'm going to encourage all the priests online and all the lay people online to reach out to each other. What we're finding among our clergy friends is that clergy, I think, are over-functioning because they're in a very different environment. They feel they have to be all things to all people. And clergy, you need to realize that you too are impacted by this crisis and have to reach out to us for nourishment and support. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. But basically, there are 4 responsibilities of vestries during regular times. And obviously, these responsibilities are somewhat modified during the period of the crisis. First of all, we really feel that discernment is an important role of vestries. The vestry, in partnership with the rector, discerns where God is calling the congregation in a particular point in time. Helping to articulate the mission and vision of the congregation, identifying new leaders. Obviously, canonically, vestries move people on through the process of ordination, but also to identify the next generation of leaders in the congregation, and also managing resources and finances of the congregation. Now, keep these four major tasks in mind, which are vestry responsibilities during all times, and think about how those roles and responsibilities may change during a time of crisis. But what about now? Leaders of organizations, governmental leaders, and vestries, obviously we need to deal with the crisis at hand. And there are day-to-day stuff that we need to do and deal with. But while we're dealing with the day-to-day crisis at hand, we have to start anticipating that this will end at some point. The frustrating thing is we don't know exactly when that end will happen, but I think we have to start, while we're dealing with the crisis at hand, we also have to think about what might our parish or the church look like in a post-pandemic world. And I'm going to say it's going to look very different. And I think those congregations and parishes and faith communities that will be able to regroup on the other side are those that maintain contact with their people and followed some of these simple things that I want to highlight over the next few moments. First of all, we have to lead by example. This is the time when leaders at every level of the church and world need to realize that they are role models for the communities they lead. Please, first of all, we as vestry members, we as people of faith, we as disciples of Jesus, have to follow all federal, state, and local directives and guidelines. In other words, if we're told to hunker down at home, we have to hunker down at home. I think it'll be disconcerting for our fellow parishioners to see us flagrantly violating social distancing guidelines during this time of crisis. So in order to keep ourselves safe and our families safe and wider society safe, let's follow the directives of those people who are charged with handing them down. Pray. This is the time when we should pray unceasingly. Pray for ourselves, pray for our faith communities, pray for the world. And that could be spontaneous prayer, it could be centering prayer, it could be the Jesus prayer. But prayer is really critical to grounding us, especially when we're not participating in the normal liturgical cycle of our parishes, doing morning prayer or Compline or any of the offices on our own. There's even an abbreviated version for families that we might want to do if we don't have the time or the inclination, but prayer is critical. Focus on the essentials, but don't sweat the small stuff. And clearly the essentials at this point in time are making sure that our people are safe and well and are being provided with spiritual connections to the extent possible, are getting pastoral care to the extent possible. We also have to make sure that our staff our staff people, our priests and other people are being taken care of, are safe and well. We have to make sure that our buildings are secure, that our bills are paid, and that the day-to-day operations are happening. Much the same way we're doing in our own homes when we're not doing the normal day-to-day activities. And don't sweat the small stuff. I know it's very easy, and I know even in my own household, at times when you're confined with spouses or family on a regular basis, little things may set us off. And it's going to be those little things that provoke major conversations or disagreements. The challenge is, I think, in our own lives, in the lives of our faith communities, not to sweat the small stuff. And quite frankly, that is a challenge for me, because sometimes it's the small stuff that we have the most immediate control over. Stay connected. Stay connected with each other as vestry people. Stay connected with the rector. Stay connected with people in your congregation. What some congregations are doing is they're divvying up the parish list and assigning them to vestry members to call them on a regular basis. Interestingly, people pick up their phones in times of crisis when they're hunkering down. And it's an opportunity just to check in. How are you doing? What do you need? Especially those people who may be shut-ins or elderly or frail. Do you need groceries? Do you need magazines? Do you need whatever you need to get through this crisis? I would suggest you have weekly check-ins, not necessarily formal vestry meetings, but weekly check-ins. What we've been doing at ECF is we have what we call Wednesdays at 3. I have staff all over the country, and we get together by Zoom, and we're all on the screen, and we basically check in. How are people doing? We have people with young children at home. Adrian, our host today, her husband is a doctor and dealing with the day-to-day crisis in Metro New York. She has 2 young kids that she's homeschooling and also doing her job. It's important that Adrian and other people have a chance to share what's going on in their life during this very difficult time. So have weekly check-ins. And there may be some business that needs to be taken care of, but just make sure that you all are sharing what's going on and responding to each other's concern. This is the time when isolation is very, very easy to fall into, especially for those who live alone and don't have the same social activities during normal times. Communicate, 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 communicate. During times like this, there's no such thing as over communicating. And that may mean email blasts to members just saying, please call if you need anything. It may be calling your fellow parishioners, your fellow vestry people. Let people tell you that stop bothering me rather than reaching out to them. Because quite frankly, it's not as though people have a lot to do right now, and a friendly phone call is very welcome. Feel free to grieve. As I mentioned earlier, we're grieving. This is a grief process. We're grieving the loss of our normal life, our normal activities, and as well as the life of our faith communities. Be proactive rather than reactive. It's very easy to fall into a situation when something like this happens. There are times we have to react. We have to react if we get sick or something happens, but be proactive. Be proactive in your own personal life. Anticipate things that might occur. Anticipate the fact that today is April 2nd, and there are people in our congregations who, because of being economically displaced or laid off, are struggling with issues of paying their rent, their mortgage, their insurance premiums, their groceries. So maybe even dropping off a bag of groceries, paper goods if you can find them. Something as simple as that will go a long way, especially when the crisis is over. Maintain a non-anxious presence. I know that's easier said than done. We are all anxious, but people are looking to their leaders for some sense of calmness. And that's where prayer comes in. I find that when I'm very anxious, as we all are, just a period of centering prayer, a little meditation, a small devotion could ground us. So the non-anxious presence is important. Support the rector and staff. Back to my point of partnership. This is really important. Because our priests have an important role during times of crises, and they may need a shoulder to cry on or a sympathetic ear. And vestry people, and wardens especially, play that important role. Excuse me. Think and act like a team. At ECF, we talk a lot about collaboration and team leadership. This is not the time for lone rangers. We're in this together. We're in this together as a nation, as a world, as a state, as a municipality. But we really want to model to the rest of the congregation that we're here as a team, we're here as a family. Maintain transparency. This is the time when people are anxious, they want to make sure they have information. So if there's something going on that people need to know, respecting privacy and boundaries. But let people know what's going on. If there's a major thing happening at the church or a major financial issue or lots of people are sick, let people know that's going on because transparency is critical. Now getting into some nitty-gritty issues. Monitor cash flow. You can have an endowment of multiple millions of dollars, but if you don't have cash, you're not going to be able to get through this next period of time. This is getting more to the fiduciary aspects, and we can talk more about it. This is when cash is king. And having cash flow to do payroll, to pay utilities, other expenses that come up is going to be critical. So I'm especially talking to probably here the rectors and priests in charge and treasurers. Do everything possible to maintain cash flow during this critical time. We can also talk more about it during the discussion time, but this is also the time when we talk about money. Obviously, if we're checking in on someone who is vulnerable or anxious, this isn't the time to talk about money, but at some point soon, we need to let people know that their pledge is important and to support the congregation and the faith community when we're not all together. That goes back to my cash flow issue. But people, we're all being bombarded with a lot of requests for money, charitable contributions. People need to hear from us as well. Obviously, we have to be diplomatic and sensitive and pastoral about it. But people need to know that we need their ongoing contributions in order to maintain our operations during the time of emergency, and also, more importantly, when this is over. Stay in the present while planning for the future. This will pass. What I'm finding that what this crisis has done for me personally in terms of my leadership, I'm much more focused on the present than I usually am. A lot of times, I'm always 2 steps beyond where I need to be. But I'm also starting to think about what does ECF look like at the other end of the crisis? And I think you as the vestry need to start thinking about that as well. What will St. Swithin's look like on that first Sunday when church is open? What do we do? Do we have a normal service? Do we have a time for reflection and sharing? What if it's gradual? What if they ask churches to only have 50% capacity, like some of our governors are doing for grocery stores? What does that look like? What will people want to do? Do we still have that strawberry festival in May, or even if we're open, or do we do something different? How do we nurture people who've been isolated for weeks, if not months? What if people don't come back? What if people get so used to not going to church that they say, I don't need to go back, I want to do something else? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that Madison Avenue is going to have to start asking itself. Are we going to go back to that restaurant or that store when they're reopened? Or are we going to say, well, that restaurant and store really wasn't that important to me after all? And embrace patience, flexibility, ambiguity. Again, it's easier said than done, but these are the times when we have to dig deep down into the inner recesses of our hearts for those periods of patience, flexibility, ambiguity. Back to our friend Adrienne. Every day she gets up and has no idea what's going to happen with her kids, her husband. He comes home every night after long shifts dealing with people who are sick. And how do you kind of support him, but also say, hey, we have a household and a family to run? And I'm sure Adrienne is finding patience, flexibility, and ambiguity more than she's ever 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 felt before. These are important qualities all the time, but especially during this time. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing right now. I mean, not sharing the screen, and open it up to questions and comments. And how's it work? I mean, I guess my first question is, how are people doing? You know,
Mhm.
rather than what they're doing, how you doing, and what are you needing from each other, or so I'm going to leave it open. I hope some of these comments were helpful. Some of these thoughts. It's just helpful to. I mean, this isn't rocket science, but it's helpful to kind of focus on those things we need to focus. So I'm going to stop now and see where people are. Any questions?
Sure, sure. And just to remind everyone, I am monitoring the chat box at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and also Facebook Live. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm trying to cover it all. And maybe while we're warming up and getting everyone to start typing in, Donald, do you have any examples you might give us of ways that we might support our clergy at this time? I know you might have some clergy in your family um, that we might
Well,
suggest to people.
well, something simple like saying, we're going to leave. I'm going to leave a casserole at your back door today, so you don't have to. So you don't have to cook, or your spouse or partner doesn't have to cook. Um, a check-in saying, "How you doing?
Hmm.
How are you doing? How are you feeling? What can I do to support you today?" Um, part of it is, some of the social interactions are limited, but let's say they have young kids, say, I will kind of sit on your back deck and watch your kids play in the yard so you can take a walk with your spouse, or nap, or have a glass of wine, whatever you need. I mean, it's the simple things that are going to go a longer way than the more complex things.
Absolutely. So we have a few comments coming in here. Suzanne writes, trying to keep a routine. These comments are helpful as a rector. Thanks for reminding us that we do not need to over-function. I think we
Absolutely.
can't emphasize that enough. Um,
Absolutely. And Suzanne, you have to remind yourself about that. And we as vestry people and lay leaders have to also support that. I'll tell you what, people aren't going to kind of say, boy, Suzanne didn't respond immediately when I reached out for some kind of issue. People are going to give us all the benefit of the doubt. But my older son's a priest in Abilene, Texas, a new rector. And thankfully, he has 3 little kids who are keeping him grounded. But it's really important. We're here for you. We have your back. And sometimes even using those words, I have your back,
mhm.
is really critical.
Wonderful. Sherry Harrington writes, we are participating in a weekly check-in conference call among our vestry, and yes, they are very helpful in touching base regarding how our parishioners are doing and what immediate needs may be needed. I was wondering, Donald, what about boundaries? All this technology, we could find ourselves online 24/7, helping, reaching out, trying to touch base. Do you have any guidance on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'm working from home, as you can tell, which is generally not my style. I have staff who function very well working at home, uh, and it's been a lot easier. I've been on Zoom more the last 3 days than I have my entire life. I think we all need to buy stock in Zoom. But there's also something where when you are working home or your computer screen is open, is that you kind of want to look all the time.
Mhm.
And I think we have to have times, and whatever that is, and it may be dinner time or noon time, when we turn off our devices. And maybe we have a response saying, a voicemail saying, uh, I'll get back to you after 2 or after 3.
Mm,
And this is especially for clergy, because being connected 24/7 is also anxiety producing, and I think it further adds to this over functioning feel. Um, Sarah Whedon, Central Pennsylvania. We love Central Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
Your bishop, you're wonderful people there, and I spent some wonderful time there last fall. Yeah, I think there are going to be communities, especially smaller parishes with more mature members of the congregation who don't have the same technological capability. For example, you may not be able to live stream your service.
Hmm.
And I think for those kinds of situations, telephone calls are critical. And maybe even hard copy newsletters or resource lists or prayers. Um, that may be a time when you leave a little bit of chocolate at their front door with the note saying thinking about you. A loaf of bread or a muffin or a donut, kind of going back to pre-technological times. I know that's difficult, but again, we have to think about how we maintained or how our parents and grandparents maintained contact with each other during times of crisis. I'm thinking about the London Blitz, for example, when you'd go into the subway tunnels and emerge wondering whether your house was still standing.
Mm.
A lot of it was kind of basic stuff. I know part of the problem now is that the social interaction, we can't even hug people or shake their hands or touch them, but creative ways of going back to basics. Um, Tiffany Myers, yes. Can you read that for me, please?
Absolutely. Yep. We have Tiffany Myers, and then I'm going to have a question from Mary Jane as well. So Tiffany Myers writes, we had to furlough our music director, Christian formation director, and sexton. Keeping administrators through Easter means a loss of music for our Holy Week and Easter services, which will be streamed, which is sad for our priest. Means a sadness among vestry too regarding staff, although resolute that it was the wise decision. Still concerned about money, even if we take a loan from the diocese, we worry about taking that on since our budget for the year already exceeded projected income before the pandemic struck. On the positive side, we are streaming services and checking in with parishioners and have Zoom for vestry meetings.
Yeah, you seem to be doing everything right.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time that we need to. This is clearly a situation that needs to be grieved. I mean, furloughing staff is a very, very difficult decision and an important decision. And I think one way to do, and I think even though they're furloughed, these are people who also need pastoral care and support and phone calls. Um, all I can say is, you're not alone, and that when we get together again and when things are reopened, there's going to be a time when we have to kind of reconcile with ourselves and each other what this means and how difficult these times were. But I think this goes back to the issue of transparency and communication and making connections with people. Yes, please remind people that if you drop off food, guidelines need to be followed. No, you can't. Yeah, no, I agree. You can't leave an unwrapped cake at the front door. Yes, follow all. There's all kinds of things about the containers that you
Mm-hmm.
use that are less likely to absorb viruses. Yeah, no, thank you for that reminder.
Absolutely. And we have Mary Jane Devons has a question. She says, any suggestions on how to be more proactive rather than reactive? We made a late change in our virtual Easter service. It was a difficult decision, but we couldn't have necessarily been planned any earlier.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things is be proactive about those things that you can be proactive about. Um, going back to the fact, let's go back to some of the fiduciary business aspects. being proactive about the fact that the normal cycle of pledges and income coming in is not going to happen, that people may need reminders, or that if you do need to call a creditor or whomever, that you may be a little late with the payment in June or May, you do that now. Being proactive about the fact that we're not in the office to make photocopies of whatever notice we're sending to people, so we might need to kind of plan those things ahead. I find sometimes that in times of total lack of control, you try to control those things you have some control over.
Amen.
That's kind of what I mean by proactivity.
We have a question from Kate. She says, we have always maintained a disciplined spending policy from our endowment. Is it prudent with disruptions in income now to increase the spending policy a little now to bridge the gap?
Well, yeah, that's a question that all of us are struggling with. And the other issue is that our endowment values are a lot lower, maybe up to 20% lower than they were before this occurred. I think part of it is, I guess my short answer would be, we need to maintain the cash flow to keep our operations going right now during the crisis and immediately thereafter. This is not the time to scrimp and save. If you need the money to kind of pay people and to communicate with people and to make sure that people's pastoral and sacramental, to the extent possible, needs are being met, this is the time when we need to do that. But this is also the time when we can kind of save money. This is a time when we don't, especially those of us still in Rust Belt areas, we don't have to kind of crank up the heat, unheat the buildings, or, we're not traveling, we're not doing a lot of typical hospitality. So there are opportunities where there are opportunities to save. I think that's where you quote unquote scrimp. But in terms of the basics, and the basics in terms of communicating with your members and responding to their needs, this is not the time. And I also think that, back to my cash flow issue, it's going to be really important that we have cash in our checking accounts to pay our bills. I would say probably here it's April 1st, I would say through June. And some people are taking money out of their endowment to make sure that they have that cushion.
We have a question here from someone at St. Mary's Church in Provo. Can you provide some recommendations for messaging the congregation about continuing their pledging during these trying times? Great question.
Well, first of all, that should not be the first email or message out of the box. If you haven't communicated with people, be sure you have a pastoral communication system with people that has been in place, and that includes emails and texts and phone calls. So that the first thing out of the box shouldn't be, we need your money. But after you feel that you've been in touch with people, you say, listen, we know these are challenging times, but your pledge, your contribution is critical. You're part of the family. We need your financial support to keep us going and to be here with you when this is all over. It needs to be an appeal, like any kind of appeal is during annual stewardship drives. But it has to be mindful of the fact that these are challenging times for everybody. Now, obviously, if you do know that there are people who are without any paycheck and can't meet their own day-to-day expenses, those are the people you may not want to ask them for money at the moment. Those are the people that you want to be in relationship with and there to support them. But I think I would say, maybe we get through Holy Week and Easter, but right after Easter, I would say, listen, we haven't, we've been shut down for, at that point, it'll be close to a month, right?
Mhm.
Uh, we need to keep the operation. And especially the other thing is, it's very easy at this point to kind of say, maybe some of our outreach ministries need to go by the wayside. Obviously, outreach ministries are going to be done differently, especially if we do like feeding programs. But it's really important that we maintain that connection with our neighbors and our communities, and let people know, let our members know that during this time of crisis, we're responding to your needs and, to the extent possible, to the needs of our neighbors and other constituents. So.
Mm. And I just want to read a comment from Sally Fox, just with some more suggestions here. She writes, I send letters with thoughts and suggestions for prayers and worship ideas to parish 4 times a week and make phone calls daily. I also send sermons for upcoming Sundays. I'm going to share webinar notes with Vestry and include Vestry in making phone calls as you described. Yes, sharing the call responsibilities, absolutely. I also appreciate the reminder to think about the first day back. And she passes on her thanks for this excellent information. Yes, it's important to think about, we will be back.
I think that's going to be the real difficult in society. The first day, the Monday that everything is open, and we're gonna think, oh, everything's back to normal, and it won't be back to normal, and some things will never get back to normal. Just think about Macy's furloughing 100,000 employees. I mean, what's Macy's going to look like at the other end? Airline, major aspects of the world economy. Again, we have our own problems. We don't necessarily have to worry about a billion-dollar corporation, but they're going to look very different. We're going to look very different. But that first day back, and start thinking about, maybe that would be an interesting vestry exercise during your weekly check-ins. What do you think the first Sunday back is going to look like? Mm-hmm. And what can we do to anticipate? Now, back to being proactive, we don't necessarily know a lot of the details, but we can think about, what's the service going to look like? What's the hospitality going to look like? The other thing to our clergy friends and people who preach, these are incredible preaching opportunities. I mean, Holy Week and Easter, and not that people know about it, but any sermon that does not somehow connect with the current crisis is not really relevant to how you live the gospel in your daily life and work. And I'm sure everyone is doing that. But people also want to hear the good news. I don't want to hear a 15-minute sermon on just, everything that's going on in the world. But I want to know how, for example, the raising of Lazarus, which was last week, how that connects with us as Christians and disciples in very challenging times. Holy Week, that's going to be an incredible opportunity, especially those of us who are live streaming, to connect with people who aren't, people are watching our live streams who aren't necessarily our usual members of our congregation. Mm-hmm. There's some speculation that there may be kind of a mini Great Awakening, maybe a not so great awakening after this is over, where people are going to look for spiritual connections. How do we kind of position ourselves as local Episcopal faith communities to connect with those people who say, gee, I may want to check out this thing called the church? So even anticipating kind of this as an evangelizing opportunity beyond just our own current members of our congregation. There's the old saying, always take advantage of a crisis. I know that's a little cynical at times, but crises create opportunities. I was having a conversation with a board member because we were talking about our upcoming board gathering in May about strategic planning. And she said, well, it's kind of silly to plan right now, isn't it? I said, well, no, because those companies and individuals who in 1944 were making sure the Allies were winning the war and maybe making tanks and airplanes, they were also the ones who were anticipating that when the war ended, there are going to be millions of GIs coming back who would want cars and homes and jobs and groceries and wives and children. So the idea is, yes, we're in wartime, but what will the peace look like? And we're the ones who are going to have to shape that in a very different time and place.
Thank you, Donald. So we have answered our current questions and comments. So Donald, do you have any final comments that lead us kind of into our days?
I guess my final comment is be gentle with ourselves. You know, we talked about routine. I think routine's important, but we're not going to be as productive or as cheerful or as, I mean, you know, barbers and hairdressers, I'm ready for my haircut. Maybe I'm not going to be perfectly coiffed at all times. But be gentle with ourselves, be gentle with each other, and reach out. It's very easy not to communicate. I know that, you know, not to communicate with those we live with because we're preoccupied or we're tired or we're annoyed. But this is the time when a smile, a comment, a crazy series on television, a laugh, a favorite song, a favorite food, a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, really go a long way. And remember, when push comes to shove, when this is all over, people are not going to say, oh boy, that rector, you know, she never got X, Y, and Z done during that period of time when she had all this time on her hands. They're going to say, that rector was there for me when I needed her. She called me, she reached out, she sent me little prayers, whatever the kind of things we were talking about. That's going to make the difference. First of all, it's the right thing to do as people, as human beings, as disciples, as followers of Jesus. But it's also part of our legacy as leaders. And the legacy may be judged 6 weeks from now, 6 years from now, 60 years from now. This is going to have such a profound impact on us as individuals. We're going to say, wow, during that period of time, that church, St. Switham's, was there for us. And that rector, that priest, she's probably long gone now, but she was an incredible leader during some incredible times. And her leadership was servant leadership, pastoral leadership, leading by example. And we could all do that. I'm mentioning the clergy, but all of us have a critical role to play in this during this time of crisis and beyond. So all I can say is we're here for you. If you have thoughts, comments, questions, please, we have other webinars. We have a resource page. We're going to try to do more of these as time goes on. But thank you for your faithfulness, and thank you for being there for each other and for those people we serve and support.
Donald, let me just finish off with some just updates on. We will be posting this webinar by tomorrow morning on ecfvp.org. Also, if you registered for this webinar, you will be receiving a link to watch this webinar. It will be coming to your email inbox. And just as Donald said, and it's something, the idea of kind of maintaining a calm presence. And I wanted to build off that and just advertise. We are holding a webinar on Monday at noon Eastern time, and we will be having a former healthcare chaplain and current seminary student Chantaban. She will be in dialogue with the Reverend Jaden Harsuf, talking about his experience of leading his congregation during this time. And their focus on this conversation will really be kind of sources and tips on change management, grief recovery, and self-care during this time. So that's what we have set up for next week. And please check out our website, ecfvp.org or episcopalfoundation.org for updates on our webinars, our articles, and Facebook and Instagram, all those ones that we are currently addicted to. Donald, can you offer any final prayer for us before we close?
Yes.
Thank you.
Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity to be together. We thank you for your abiding presence in our lives. Empower us, strengthen us, heal us, and make us always true disciples and faithful followers of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Let us bless the Lord.
Thank you, everyone. All right. Bye-bye.